You know what the most dangerous thing in America is, right? Nigga with a library card.
This is the Most Dangerous Thing in America podcast, a show in which we read books by black authors and they're talked about by a black author, and you can listen if you are black or not black. That is okay. This week on the podcast, we are doing Dream Count by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. This is like the second book, I believe, that we've done of Adichie's on the podcast. We did Half of Yellow Sun. This book actually came out this year in 2025, so much more relevant to the time. Half of Yellow Sun we did years after it came out. But so, let's hop in. A brief synopsis of Dream Count. It tells the story of 4 black women and their interactions, mostly romantic, with men. None of the women in the story marry or even have a long-term partner. And the main character, Chia, and I call her the main character because she bookends the story. Her sections do. The main character, Chia, dates many men but struggles to find a person who truly knows her, and that idea forms the through line of the book. And yeah, so there's 5 sections of the book, 2 for Chia and then 1 each for Sakura, Kariato, and Omologar. I'm probably butchering the pronunciation of these names, but I read the book. I didn't listen to an audiobook, so I don't know how to say them. But yeah, okay, so let's talk about the themes. I wrote down 3 themes, and I would argue that I wrote down 1 theme with 3 pieces, and then I wrote down 2 other observations, basically. And then a couple of thoughts. So let's hop into the themes. The biggest theme is this idea of full knowledge, and that's what I just mentioned right now with Chia saying a man who truly knows her. So, the full knowledge thing, if we break it down into 3 pieces and talk about it, or is it only 2 pieces that I broke it down into? No, 3 pieces. So the first idea will be full knowledge of a person. So this is the central theme of the book. And ostensibly, this theme applies to the concept of knowing another person fully in a romantic way. So not in a friendship way. There's a lot of friendship in the book, female friendship especially. Chia, Sakura, and Omologar, they grew up together. Chia and Omologar are cousins. And then Sakura is a close friend. Kariato is Chia's housekeeper that she hires when she moves to America. All 3 of these women grew up in Nigeria. Kariato is not from Nigeria. She's from Guinea. But so they know each other really well, but that's not what the book is about. It's about knowing somebody full in romantic love. And so what does it mean to know another person fully? And that's the kind of love that Chia is looking for. She never finds this love, and she rejects all other forms of love that she encounters. And what I mean is all other forms of romantic love. So she dates mostly guys who suck. Darnell sucks because he's pretentious and rude and doesn't think about her. There's a guy who's married who is obviously cheating on his wife with her. There's a variety of different people, but there is also, at least one good guy like Chuka, the Nigerian engineer. He's just kind of boring. And she wants a guy who inspires her soul by knowing her so well, kind of thing. So she's chasing this concept some of us might think is like a starry-eyed version of love and doesn't really exist. Certainly that's the opinion of some of her friends in the book. So that's one way that we see this theme. Another way is Sakura, who rejects the necessity of full knowledge of a person. And her goal is to simply find somebody and just have that work. So, she interacts with Chia. She doesn't think that the full knowledge thing is important. She just wants to find a guy. That doesn't work for her either, but we'll get to that later. Omologar rejects the existence of full knowledge as well. She's this great unknowable force in the book, and she just does things that are unpredictable and require an amazing amount of power and motivation, but it's also unclear if she's happy by the time we get to the end of the book. But her thing is like, it's almost impossible to know a person fully because she's the kind of person who can't be fully known. That would be like how people would describe her. So those are really the three main characters' viewpoints on it. Chia absolutely believes in it. It exists somewhere. It's important to her. Sakura rejects it and just wants to find someone who she can have a baby with, really. And then Omologar, who's like, no, I don't even understand why you would want to know somebody fully, why that's important, and why should I even care? It's a different type of rejection. And then Kariato, who is like completely different than these other three women in that socioeconomically, just completely different. Like the three, Chia, Sakura, and Omologar, are extremely successful and from a different socioeconomic class. Kariato is like an immigrant who moved to America on a refugee visa and has a drastically different life experience. And in that way, she's kind of like not even allowed to get to consider this idea. In a way, it's a privilege that these three women get to even think about that. Not that they don't go through several hardships, especially Zakora. She really suffers. But overall, I didn't like this thing. I didn't care, or theme. I didn't care for it. And I didn't think that it really tied the book together. Like, it's the name of the book. And Chia references it with respect to romantic partners. So it's like definitely an important theme in that sense. But I didn't think it offered any like interesting takeaways on modern love. I didn't think we came away from it going like, oh right, this is what um this was like a good exploration of this idea. So that's one thing. And another thing about it is like in all the instances where they're dating, none of them are on dating apps. Maybe this is a trite observation, but it's like if this is supposed to be about the pitfalls of modern love and a little bit about like what expectations men and women have from each other. And Omologar's whole thing is like men learn about sex from pornography. That's modern-ish, but like porn on the internet has been going on for a long time now. I feel like from what I see and from single people I know, the dating apps is a much bigger and weirder influence on people's romantic lives right now than like pornography, which has just been weird and been a big influence for decades now. So anyway, I didn't think that this theme was as interesting as the next version of the theme, which is full knowledge of a place. I think this is the most interesting part of the book, and I guess, you know, right, we can decide what the book is. Anybody can decide what the book is about. And at the end of the novel, Adichie has a coda, an author's note, where she says that, a novel is never necessarily about what it appears to be about. So, having just said that I didn't like the first version of the theme of full knowledge of a person, perhaps Adichie's point is like, hey, I named the book Dream Count. Technically, it's about romantic love, but actually, it's about this. So, this that I hope it's about, this is our second version of the theme, is full knowledge of a place. And each person in the novel, especially Omologar and Chia and Kariato, so those three, will focus on them, has a very special a very special spatial relationship. So first, Chia is becoming a travel writer, and her whole job is going to places and trying to get a sense of them. So, what are these places like? But even more to the point, what are they like for an African woman in various locales? And she makes a conscious decision at one point to not just write about like African countries. When she goes to African countries finally, she writes about like the difficulty in this one place or something like that. And she's like, next time I go to an African country, I'm just going to write about the restaurants like I do when I go to European countries or Asian countries. So that demonstrates that the full knowledge of a place isn't just the tragic parts of their history, right? She doesn't just want to write about Kenya or Benin or Nigeria or South Africa, like, oh, this happened 2 decades ago, and we go to this site, and here's where this horrible massacre was, or a prison that existed, or this thing. Like, also, they have restaurants. They have a beautiful, vibrant culture. Full knowledge of a place requires, actually looking at that, so that when you hear the word Africa or you hear the name of an African country, you don't just immediately think, oh, right, I remember, you hear Kenya, you don't just immediately think of the Mau Mau. Like, what if we hear these countries now and we just think culture? Like, what about that? So I think that that's one aspect of the thing. A second aspect is, and to strengthen that idea, when she is talking about becoming a travel writer, Omologar says on page 31 about places, people become props and countries become performances instead of places when they're tourist destinations. So that right there speaks exactly to the idea of, if you want to gain full knowledge of a place, um, pretty difficult to do as a tourist. And the danger of these places that are tourist locales is that uh, they become caricatures of themselves. And then finally, on page 74, uh, Chuka is talking to Chia, and Chuka is the Nigerian engineer that she was dating for some time. And Chia had just written a piece about a country that she went to in Africa, and then an editor was like, "Hey, what if we got you to write a whole travel book about going to Africa?" And Chia's like, "Oh, that'd be awesome. That's great. I'm into that." And then it turns out that the editor just wants her to write about African suffering. And Chuka says, that's what white people think. They think that black people do not dream. Now, this is an important part in the book for a couple of different reasons, and it's actually the nexus of our themes. Because, one, Chuka ends up being like a person that Chia had discounted. Like, he actually does think more than she thought. She thought he was just like robotic engineer guy, good guy, shirt tucked into his jeans, goes to church, all of that. Super Nigerian, apparently, in terms of like that stereotype of tucking a shirt into the jeans. But she didn't think that he could see her for who she truly was, but he could see it and even offer an insight. And that insight was into the idea of like people not having full knowledge of her as a person, her as an African, Africa as a place, and the countries of Africa. So, all of that's present and good and interesting. And I think some of the strongest stuff in the book. And it continues with Kariato's story. Uh, this is the theme. So for full knowledge of a place, this character is the most important one. She doesn't know her own country as well as her sister Benta does. Like Benta wants to go learn French. Kariato obviously knows her own country, but just knows the traditional aspect of it. Doesn't know the larger uh, colonial aspect of it, but that French exists and that she could learn and that could open up a different world to her. But so she doesn't know her own country as well as Benta, her brave and daring sister. And then once she gets to America, after all of the stuff that she goes through, um, all that she knows is that she's been given this opportunity to make life better for her daughter, who's also named Benta after her sister. And that's all she really knows. She doesn't have full knowledge of like what is available to her in America. That doesn't even actually ever really exist in her mind. Um, so that's one aspect of the full knowledge thing. But then a sexual assault occurs, and this launches Caddy into a world that she doesn't understand at all, even more so than before. She doesn't understand that justice might exist for little people in America, even if it's even if the perpetrator of the crime is a quote unquote big man, to use the Nigerian term, the Adichie term. And she doesn't understand, and this is most important, how to express herself fully in English, right? She would do better to speak in Pular, but the translator she's given, also inadequate, not really like a native of her, doesn't speak the Pular dialect that she speaks. And here Adichie is highlighting the limits of language, the boundaries of consciousness, the walls that language and culture build up. And language and culture go hand in hand. And then also, obviously, the country that you're in, right, that supports those two things. Kariato is unable to understand either one in full, And this consequential lack of knowledge is much more important than anything like a romantic partner. She has a romantic partner in the book, but like that's not a big deal. It's the lack of knowledge of the place. She doesn't know how sexual assault works in America. She doesn't know how the justice system works in America. She can't express herself the way that she wants to express herself in America, and she can't get it through to people that like the very concept that she has to have her person drugged through dragged dragged through the mud in order to achieve this justice. It doesn't even seem worth it to her. And this is a true cultural misunderstanding. Of course, there are people in America who feel the same way, who feel shame and don't come forward. But there is an understanding, if you were raised here, at least among some people, that you might be able to get your justice if you're willing to go out there and bare your soul, which is, I imagine, obviously extremely difficult. But for Kadiato, there's not even that little bit of understanding, because this just wouldn't happen in her country. If she would have been sexually assaulted in her country, she would have been quiet, gone back, and just continued to live her life. So this is the second, thing we're highlighting in this knowledge of place thing. And I think the most important one, and Kadiato's story ends up becoming the most impactful story in the book, because there's no real way to say this other than just to say it. Like, it's the most real one. Like, Chia does have a starry idea of like romance. Nothing about her life is necessarily tragic. Kadiato is the book's tragic figure. So, okay. The last little bit of this knowledge of place thing to tie this theme up is Omologar and her relationship to America. It is somewhat similar to Kadiato's, although she speaks English. She's not an immigrant on a refugee visa. She's there on a student visa. So those two things are different. But even so, she does not understand the culture of America. And in this section of the book, Adichie focuses on the close-mindedness of American academia, specifically of America's liberal institutions. And the main thrust of this critique is that American exceptionalism blinds America to the multitude of cultural possibilities, that interactions in other countries between different races and religions are informed by differences in languages, culture, and history, and therefore there isn't one way to see the world. Because what Omologar basically runs into in university is that she goes to grad school to study pornography and its effects on masculinity. And as she's recounting her lived experience, she's encountering people who are basically telling her she is insensitive or racist, Islamophobic, etc., for simply recounting things that have happened to her. I think this is the most interesting section of the book. I think that it's the closest we get to like Adichie's actual viewpoint, right? Like she says in the author's note that she's not like Kadiato. She didn't grow up like Kadiato. But Omologar, she has a more similar socioeconomic background to Adichie. And the beefing with liberal institutions is, I think, can be viewed through the same prism as Adichie receiving criticism about her comments on what it means to be a woman. And then if you want to go one step further, I think so those comments, this entire section is about the idea of like different cultures have different viewpoints on different things, and you can't absolutely judge one culture from the context of another. I think you could then make an argument, not saying that it's true, but you could make the argument that the cutting scene, the female genital mutilation scenes in Kadiato's storyline could be viewed as like a Adichie preemptively addressing what somebody might say, which is, well, if we can't judge one culture from another culture, what about when things happen in another culture that are objectively bad, like female genital mutilation? What about that? In Kadiato's section, it's not like Adichie's apologizing for that practice, but she does contextualize it within the culture. So You could make the argument that that's what's happening here. I'm not really sure. I think that Omologar's character focuses so much on what's bad about America, and none of it is the traditional what's bad about America. It's not all of the stuff that people have been complaining about since Trump has been in office this time or last time, or any of the right wing stuff. It's actually attacking academia and liberal institutions. And because of that, I think it is more reasonable to posit that Adichie is, kind of coming to her own defense here and saying, like, hey, it's not, you can't just tell me that I'm wrong. I come from a different culture, and in my culture, it's this. And Americans think that because, there's diversity in their country, they can decide how diversity works around the world, but that's not how it works. So, um, I think that's what's happening in this section. And I think, if you add that to what Chia goes through with knowledge of place and what Kariato goes with knowledge of place, it makes this the most interesting theme in the whole book. Much more interesting than the idea of, will I find a man who knows me inside and out? So that's the end of that theme. And then the third version of this theme is knowledge of self. Just very quickly, this one. Essentially, do we know what we want? And there's really just two pieces here. There's Chia, who seems unsure by the end of the novel if she knows what she wants. She kind of regrets not having dated Chuka, the steady Nigerian engineer guy, and instead looking for some person who could light her soul on fire. And then Omologar spends her whole section basically shook by Auntie Jane, who says, like, don't pretend like you like your life. And Omologar, who's self-assured and never really doubted herself, all of a sudden finds herself doubting herself. So that becomes a question, like, can we ever really know ourselves? And that theme is explored as well, and also an interesting theme, and probably more interesting than the idea of just finding a romantic partner who knows you, is just, can you know yourself? Okay, we're getting along here, 20 minutes in, so let's do two more things really quickly. In the coda, that's the whole full knowledge theme done. The next thing is the grief section. So in the coda of the book, Adichie says a novel can be about something that it doesn't appear to be about. I don't know how this novel is about grief, but in the final line of that section, Adichie tells us how her mother would have reacted to Kariato's story. And the whole coda is more or less about the importance of Kariato's story. So I don't know what you can make of that necessarily. It's not for me to say the novel's not about grief. And I do think Kariato's story is important. But yeah, I think where I come down is that overall the book is about knowledge of a place. And I would say then, extending, like I talked about in that section, of a culture and a language. But Adichie says it's about grief, and it's her book, so I'm not going to say she's wrong. It's just that I didn't get that from this book. Okay. And then the final little thing here, before we just give overall thoughts, is about Black Americans. I will say I was bothered by the depiction of every Black American male in this book is either an idiot or incompetent. Now, I'm not saying that they're not idiots. Like, Darnell is an idiot. Kwame is essentially... let's first do Darnell. Darnell's the guy who Chia dates from the opening. This guy sucks, okay? And, don't like that. He's, I think, supposed to be painted as, quote unquote, one of the good ones, but he's still a small-minded American, and he's trying to adhere to this, like, white notion of success. And the basic reason they break up is because they go to, like, Paris, and she orders a mimosa at a fancy restaurant. He's like, you can't do that. And it feels like it's like this idea of, like, Chia, who's like this rich Nigerian girl, is basically like, I got that kind of thing where I'm rich. I can go into any place and just do whatever I want. I don't have to know the etiquette. But you trying to be a social leaper, Darnell, you're concerned by this stuff. And that, as a stand-in for Black American society in general, is like, that's how we're being viewed, as like, trying to adhere to, like, this etiquette because you're so low down on the totem pole. I didn't like that. And I do think that's what's happening there. I don't think that's a coincidence because it keeps on happening. So that's one, Darnell. Two is Zecora, who just basically hates all Black American men. So on page 103, she says, she tried another dating site for Black people living in the DMV, where most of the profiles displayed international travel, laurels, pictures of passport pages in the Eiffel Tower, landscapes from descending planes. I love to travel. Do you love to travel? She thought it a plebeian status symbol, this obsession with international travel that Black Americans had. See what I mean? Like people from a bush village boasting about city trips. This is the thing. So this is the idea, you know? These Black Americans obsessed with this thing, right? So that's at least like part of it. Okay, let's keep going. Let's keep going. Can I come through? Many Black men asked after a few text messages. Can I come through now? So there's the second part of it. We're either like low class tryhards or sex fiends who just care about the sex. And then there's the fact that Kwame, who is perhaps the worst male character in the book, and that's the guy that Zecora ends up getting with, he is like kind of African, but is infected by the American disease, right? Like he's not actually from Africa. And what does he end up being? The worst fucking guy in the book. Kadiato's guy, Amado, another African, also infected with the American disease, ends up selling drugs, gets himself in jail. And I'm not saying that these things can't be a little true. It's just, again, every Black American male in the book is an idiot. The lawyer who Kadiato gets is like a civil rights lawyer. And I think the impression or the implication when it first starts is like, this guy is going to be preoccupied with the civil rights aspect of this case because that's what Black Americans are always preoccupied about, instead of being about getting Kadiato her settlement and her justice. I just didn't like it. And then there's finally a whole section in which Omologar and Darnell go back and forth about, because Darnell has this joke where he says like, oh, Chia's people probably sold my people. And then Omologar scolds him and is like, you know, you forget that it's mutual suffering, that, you know, the slaves who were sold were also mourned. Man, come on. Like, I hear it, and I'm not saying that Black Americans have not like participated in negative stereotypes and, you know, reactions towards African people. And this joke about the slavery thing, like maybe that's no good. Okay, fine. But like there's the suffering of the slave is worse than the suffering of the people of the slave, right? So we shouldn't get into Impression Olympics, but if you're going to scold him in this, come on. And then after scolding him, throws him a bone. Hey, you know, I think Black Americans have the most impressive culture in the world. Everybody copies it. So, you know, you ought to be happy with your little low-class plebeian lifestyle. I didn't like it, okay? So, don't like any of that in the novel whatsoever. Almost like made me not like the novel. But the knowledge of place thing I thought was on point. So I came back around. But yeah, Adichie's viewpoints, if these are indeed her viewpoints on Black Americans, not a fan. And I would say that the fact that they're echoed and never countered, like not a single character ever comes to the defense of Black Americans, I would say then that they are the author's viewpoints. If they were, you know, at any point somebody offered a contrarian opinion, I would go, well, you know, then she's just presenting it. But I don't think so. I don't think that's what's happening here. Okay, enough of me being sensitive. Overall thoughts. To me, I think the novel feels a little jumbled. I don't know that I like the mingling of the different types of knowledge. As I said, the knowledge of the romantic partner thing just doesn't matter to me. It seems to me that Kadi's story could have been the entire center of the book, the true center. I mean, it was the center, but like it could have been just even more emphasized. Like Zecora's story didn't really matter at all, and even Chia is just like, you know, really could have just been like a secondary character, or de-emphasized more or something like that. And then to add to that, I don't really understand the inclusion of the pandemic. I hadn't even mentioned it until this point. It doesn't really add anything to the story. We don't explore for example, in any kind of great detail, how looking for specific knowledge, either through romantic or place, was put on pause during the pandemic. Like that would have been something to talk about, like Chia is a travel writer and looking for romantic love, and the pandemic puts both of those things on pause. That's something to talk about. We don't really get that. And so then why do we have it in? Well, and perhaps it's just included as a matter of fact thing that happened. Like, hey, here is a world in which a pandemic happened, and so this is just like a thing in the background. We don't have to make a whole book about it. Maybe that's the case, and maybe it's my fault for not recognizing that. But it felt like it was supposed to matter a little bit, and it just didn't matter to me. But overall, extremely well written book, as you would come to expect. Interesting characters for sure. Some things I agreed with, some things I didn't disagree with. Some things I agreed with, some things I disagreed with. And then, some themes that I think were super interesting and worth exploration. And then other themes that just kind of withered on the vine. Okay, that's going to do it for today. A little bit longer on a fiction podcast, but Adichie is worth talking about. The next time we're back here in October, I'm going to be doing a nonfiction book, An African History of Africa. In the meantime, read that book. I'll see you in a month. Go down below and like and rate and review. Subscribe on Spotify, YouTube, Pocket Casts, Podbean. And yeah, you can go into the show notes and find the website and whatnot. The music here is by TheKeepRunning. And yeah, until next time, stay black, stay safe, and keep reading.
This time enough at last. That's not fair. That's not fair at all. There was time now. There was all the time I needed. That's not fair. That's not fair.